Hello and welcome to Power BI Tips and Tricks course. So what's this course all about? This course teaches us how to deal with changing Excel sheet names. We also explore how to handle file location changes, which is also a common issue you have seen in various projects. We talk about template files in Power BI, what they are and how we can use them. We talk about how to handle different file structure issues, which might appear if the data, e.g. the Excel values you have not the same structure. We talk about circular dependency errors. So when do they appear and how can we solve them? Also, we have an idea on how to extract data from multiple folders in Power BI in an efficient way. And finally, we talk about the new, great DAX functions, which is the offset, the index, and the window functions. So if that sounds interesting to you, then let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome to the first trick. Now let's say we have opened Power BI and now we want to build a report. I have one specific Excel file which is this PBI training 1 sheet. So what this basically contains is if I double click here, let's just open that. Let me just make this smaller so you can see that. It's just an Excel file with some data in here, with some sales data to be specific. And we can see that it contains one tab which will be called orders. So one sheet in this file. Let's say this is our use case. Now let me just close this for now. And then let's just import the sheet. So nothing new. You just know how that works. You go to import data from Excel or also appear Excel workbook. We click it and we just reference to the sheet and then let's click on open it and let's just wait. And here is our navigator window. And then we can choose either the table if you have a table or the sheet. Now let's say in this case, I only have one sheet. So I can simply tick the sheet here. It's called orders. And then I can click on, in this case, transform the data if I want to adjust it, or I click on load. For now I click on load because I just want to import the data now. And this is something very common and this works without any problems, right? So I can see here I get my orders and I can use any of my fields in here to get started. So let's say this is a monthly report where we want to report our current sales figures to our, let's say, management team, right? So let's just choose one of the columns. I just want to show you that this works the way it should be. So I can create, for instance, let's say bar chart here. So let me just say bar chart here and then I choose any of the other fields. In this case, I don't have a measure, but let me just choose now, for now at least, just sales, because the main point is actually how can we deal with that. So this works without any problems. So we got one chart and of course we can create additional charts here as well to create a full report. Now what happens in the following case? Let's just say I now go into my Excel file here and let's just say this Excel file gets replaced. So this is a very common scenario. Just think about it. Maybe you have also experienced that each month you get a new sales data. So for instance, it can be automatically created and then put into a specific folder. And instead of calling it orders here, maybe it's called different. So maybe oftentimes something like, for instance, this is sales in January 23rd, for instance. Something like that, right? Or 0123, whatever you want to call it. So that's the new sheet name. And let's say if it updates to February, then again, the name of the sheet will change. So let me just save this for now. Click on Ctrl S to save it. And then let's go back inside our report in here. And now let me try to refresh the data. So let's say you have new sales data. The underlying data has changed. And now you click on refresh either by clicking refresh here or right click on the orders table and click on refresh here. That would also work. So let's click refresh, click on refresh. And you see that we get an error here. So we run into an error here, orders the key didn't match any rows and table. So this happens when the sheet itself, where you want to load the data from, has changed. So in this case, the sheet name, right? So not the data inside the sheet. This can happen. This doesn't create any problems. But if the name of the sheet changes, then Power BI can't find the order sheet anymore. Because remember, what we did was we just gave the sheet a whole new name. And this happens, as I said, often, very often, for instance, each month or each week, depending on how often you receive new data. So what can you do? Of course, you could go, or we could go inside the query editor, right? So go in here. And then we could say, if you transform the data, we could either rename the sheet inside the query editor. But this is not a scalable solution because we have to do it each time the sheet or new data gets arrived, right? So what can we do instead? So let me just first fix this for now. Let's go back in here and let's call it back orders, right? So if I call this orders here, orders, and I save this and I go closest down, and now I will try to refresh it. You'll see that this refresh works without errors, right? So Power BI can find the order sheet in this case and everything works fine. So now the solution. Let's first go inside transform data here inside the query editor. So now we're in the query editor and let's go to the advanced editor tab. So here we need to just play around with the M code a little bit. But don't worry, it won't be too intimidating. I promise. So click on advanced editor here and this is the M code. Unfortunately, I can zoom in here, but let me just copy this, Ctrl C to copy everything. Ctrl C, and then I open in here an editor and let me just paste this inside. And now you can see that that's what the data looks like. So hopefully that is good and big enough for you. But of course, you also can copy and paste it from your own Power BI file. So where is the actual problem? So if we take a look at the M code, we see that the original problem lies in the second step in this order sheet is referencing the source, which is the step above. And here it specifies an item and this item is hard-coded calling orders. So this means that it always searches for a sheet inside the Excel file. You can see it here. The kind is sheet and this sheet needs to be called orders. And that is exactly the problem, because if we rename it, or a system which sends the data to us automatically renames it each month, then of course, we would need to have to adjust it here. So of course, we could go to the editor and then now I can write in here, for instance, sales _ 0123, for instance, if it's January 23rd or whatever kind of name has been changed. I can change it here and then the query works fine until the next change. So instead, we could do the following. We could say, instead of using hard-coded values here, because we only have one sheet, we just get rid of that, and of course, we can just remove this completely. So this kind of sheet, this can be actually placed inside because it's still an Excel sheet. But now we just remove the hard-coded part where we specify a specific sheet name. And now let me just copy this, Ctrl C to copy everything, Ctrl C, and let me go back to Power BI. So let me just here and just paste it. Of course, you could also remove it here directly. I just wanted to show it to you that it is a little bit of a in size. I paste this inside. And everything we did was just remove the specific name of the sheet, which was explicitly saved here and hard-coded. And now if I click on done, you see that we got no syntax errors. But let's just check that first. We click on done. And you see that we still receive all the data, so nothing has been changed, which is good. So the table itself, this is a name in Power BI, is still called orders. But that doesn't matter, right? Because it's just the name of the table inside Power BI, but not referencing the sheet name. So that's why I can click on close and apply now. So we load it and we still see our data, so nothing has changed here. But now if we go back inside our Excel file here, let me just actually go in here and specify itself. And let's just name it, and let's say now it's February in 2023, so the system then sends the data, maybe place it automatically in a specific folder where Power BI then should load the data from. And this is the February sales, so let's call this February 23rd. It's just the name of the sheet, right? The next month it would be March and so on. So let's just save this, Ctrl S to save it. And just imagine that the sales data has also changed now for the new month, of course. Or maybe additional rows have attached here, whatever, right? The underlying data change is not the very important point here. The main point is really the naming of the sheet. So let's just save it. OK, Ctrl S to save it. And let me go back inside Power BI. Now, let me try to refresh it, right? So let's click on refresh. And you see that it loaded without any errors. So this means now for this one sheet, this could be now the new month, let's just say. This is not only February, let's say this is now March. Let's try it one more time. And also maybe modify the underlying data source. Here we got different kinds of categories. Let's add a new category in here. Where is it? Let me just scroll a little bit in here. Let's say there is a category, where is it here? The category, and the category is for instance here, let's say computer, right? Computer here. And then let me just add some sales price here. We reference sales. Let's call this maybe 300,000, right? So like that, save it, Ctrl S to save it. And if I go in here, and let's just refresh this, go in here, click on refresh. And you see that now we get a new category, which is called computer, and we don't have any issues, even though we rename the sheets. OK. And that's the trick here. So now we do not have any errors, major errors anymore regarding renaming of sheets, and we can refresh the data automatically. And there is no manual intervention from our side. Hope that helps. Give it a try. Thanks a lot for watching. And hopefully see you in the next video. Alright, welcome back. Now in the last video, we learned how we can handle one Excel file with one sheet, but what if we have multiple sheets? So this is also of course certainly often a use case. So let's explore this. So let me just go in here, and this time I'm referencing the PBI training file. You can also use your own files. So let me just go in here and go to Excel workbook. I want to import the data this time. I'm referencing this one here. So let me just click on, in this case, open, and then let's just have a look at the data in this case. There is our navigator, and then we get 3 sheets: employees, orders, and suppliers. If you want to have a preview, just select the sheet itself, and then you can see here the preview of the data. For now the data itself doesn't matter too much to us. It's more how we can handle the naming of the sheets in case it changes. So let's just reference in this case the 3 sheets I want to select here, and then click on, for instance, transform data like that, right, and again that this time we can see here we get our 3 sheets, and it's a little bit small. But if you take a closer look at the advanced editor, let me just copy this code for now just to show this to you. Ctrl C to copy it, and one more time. I go to my editor here. I just paste this inside, and this time again, it's referencing in here what we already know, an item which in this case is suppliers, and also a sheet that it is a sheet. Now in the last video we just removed this item part, including the comma separator. But this time this will be an issue if we do that. And I'm gonna show you this in a minute, but just think about it. The last time, if you only have one sheet, then of course Power BI is able to figure out. Okay, if there's only one sheet you don't have to specify the name. But this time we have 3 sheets, and that means of course if I wrote remove the supplier item here. So of course, let's do that. Let's go in here and just remove suppliers from here including the comma. I just Ctrl X copy this out or to cut it out. Click on done, and this time you can see that we run into errors. So the last trick doesn't help us here because this time we have 3 sheets. So Power Query and this goes to Power BI needs to know exactly what is the name of the sheet. So I need to go back to the advanced editor in here, and I need to go in here and I just paste this again inside item suppliers. I put in a comma here. It's kind of Excel sheet. That's fine. You can see no syntax errors. I click on done. So this is the original code like right. So I click on done, and of course now you can see the data again. So okay, so this can be handled, but still we have the same issue. Because if I click on close and apply like that. Okay, so we can load the data, that is fine. Of course, we can create our report, also make sure that in this case that our model is set up. That's very important. That's why I want to point this out here. And of course always make sure that you also have a dates table if you create a model where you want to create your reports. But let's go back to the actually pain point for us. Let's go to the report view. And let's just say again, I have my orders table here, and for instance, I'm using here. I'm gonna reference in the sales here directly. Normally best practice of course create a measure, don't use the columns directly, but for now as I said, this is not the main issue here. Let's go to the suppliers here, or let's say the employees, and just see the employee name, or let's say employee name here. And see which employee is responsible this case for each of the sales. So this works fine. We can create our reports, but then the bad thing happens again. I'm hoping this one that was the wrong one. Let me just close this. I open this file. With the 3 sheets in this case, again could be more as well. Let me just click on OK. Here, and then I named this for instance. These are now not the orders anymore. But these are now the sales or orders, or it's just the name of, for instance in this case April in 23, right? Like now I save it, Ctrl S to save it, and again. I'm going back to my Power BI file here, and I try to refresh the data, and I have the same issue. But this time it tells me that actually 3 of those are wrong. But the point is actually as soon as one is wrong like this one, the key didn't match any rules on the table. That's the same error message we had last time, that now also the other queries are blocked as you can see it here. Right. So if one runs into errors here because it's from the same file, all of them run into errors. So that will not work. So let me just go to the Excel file again. And let's just name this again. And then let's just find out how we can solve this. So Ctrl S to save it. Let's go back in here and let's just refresh us. Now click on refresh. And again, this works fine, and now our report is up to date. So what can we do? How can we handle this? We've seen that the first solution, just remove the hard code value, does not work. But we can do something else. We could go back inside transform data here, and this time what's important is that we have a closer look at the source, the first step. So if I click on source, this source here, this step, and the way it looks like, that's the same in this case for all the street 3 sheets. Because they all start from the original Excel file. So it looks here the same, and in orders. It would be exactly the same if you go to source here. That's the same. And the interesting part for us now is actually the order of the sheet. Meaning, as you can see, orders here is the first sheet inside this list. Employees is the second sheet, and suppliers is the third sheet, and because Power Query in this case, the Power Query editor is 0 indexed. It means that orders is actually the 0 sheet. Employees is the first sheet and suppliers is the third sheet. Sorry, the second sheet. Okay, so 0, 1, 2. Okay, so how can we use this now? Well, we could go one more time inside the advanced editor here. So let's go maybe to the employees first, and you can see that employees is the second one, right? Just move that go back in one more time just to make sure, as orders is the 0, employees is the first. So the second in total, but the first regarding the indexing and supplies is second. That means let me go to supplies. Okay. Here we run to error when we just went to, in this case, the advanced editor, and we just removed this hard-coded value items is equal to supplies. But because we know actually that this is the second index, so the third sheet in total but the second index sheet, instead of referencing the hard-coded value here with the name, which causes trouble for us, we can actually refer to the number. So that means that let me just copy this one more time because it's very small in here. Let me go back inside the editor, just paste this like that, and we can actually now rid of the suppliers. But unfortunately what we cannot do, at least as far as I know, is simply put in the 2 in here. We need to do it the following way. We need to get rid of everything in the brackets. So including that it is a sheet, we remove everything in here. We only keep the curly braces or curly brackets. I'm not sure actually what this is that named correctly, but let's remove everything here, and it's that put in simply the number 2. So remember, it's simply the third sheet -1, so always sheet number -1. Because it's your index, and let's just use this now. Let's Control-C the copy this, and now let's go back to our editor and just go in here and just paste this inside. So paste this inside in here. Okay, and you see that now we only have source 2, and let's just check what the data looks like after we have replaced this, because the syntax is fine. So click on Done. Click on Done, and you see that we still got the correct data in here, right? So it's also just this here for the orders and employees, just to make sure that this works. Go inside orders. Also go inside, let's go in here the advanced editor, and I remove everything in here, including the brackets. Remove it, just put in a 0. Okay, syntax is fine. Click on Done, and the third one for the employees, go in here one more time, click on the advanced editor, and this time remove everything in here. And this one as well, and put it a 1, and then click on Done, and always make sure check that the data is still there in the final step. Okay. So this seems to work. So let's click on Close and Apply. First, and now let's see, and we still got here our data, okay, and we got all 3 tables. Again, the name of the table will not change even if the underlying name of the sheet will change. But the more interesting part to us is what happens now if the name of the sheet changes. So does this a notification inside the query editor help us now to avoid running into issues regarding renaming of sheets? So let's try that. Let's go in here, and I'm going to my PBI training. I still have it open actually in here. And now let's just check this, let's say, and we made all 3 of them right because we made all of them dynamic. So let's say these are the orders. 23_23, and these are the employees, let's say for this one as well, underscore and then 23. 23, and finally, let me also rename the suppliers just to make sure that this works for all the sheets we have. So here, and also underscore 23. The name itself, really it's up to you, right? I just use some examples here. So first enter, and let me just save this. Save it, and because we currently visualize here the employees, so let's call there's also an employee, which is called, or let's just rename for instance, Robert. So Robert King is now in this case Dan, right? It's Dan. Dan King, okay, whatever. Control S, save it, and let's go back inside here, and let's go in here. And let's try to refresh this and see what happens with Robert, as well as whether we encourage any errors here. So let's click on refresh the data, and now you see that now it's not Robert anymore. It's Dan, and the refresh went through without any errors. So again, this helps us now to dynamically renaming sheets, even because we need to do it, or because an automatic system does it automatically and sends the data into a specific location. maybe SharePoint or any other kind of file system you have, and where Power we are then getting the data from, but this time there's no manual intervention anymore from our side, which helps us to save a lot of time and also some pain, right? So thanks for that, for your attention. Hopefully that is helpful as always, and I hopefully see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now, let's deal with another issue which often arises when people work with Excel files in Power BI. Which is if the location of the underlying file changes. This could happen because you or a colleague of you changes the location and puts the file in a different folder, or if you send the file, for instance, to a colleague of you. Of course, if you have it saved somewhere on your local drive, then he or she has different path to the underlying data, right? If he or she saves the data, maybe as well, but on a different location. So what can we do about this? Let me first show you the problem and then a solution, or best practice at least. So, you can see here I have a folder and we still have currently the file from our last video in here, and it's still located in this level up folder here, which in this case is the PBI training file. And so far everything is fine. So if we go here and click on refresh, then of course the file is found and everything is fine. But now let's just say at this time I put this here and I Control X, in this case, I cut it out and put it in the location change folder. Paste it here, and of course, I need to close this first. So let me just close it. Yes, I want to repeat it, and now it's inside location folder. Okay. So you see that it is not there anymore in this folder. So now if I try to refresh the data, click on refresh, you see that now here could not find the file, right? This is an often issue, which happens. So of course now we could go inside the query editor and do this manually, right? So we can go inside here, transform data in here, and then we would have to do it manually. So for each of the, in this case, sheets, in this case, we have 3, I would have to go to the source in here. And here in the Excel.workbook file contents, there's a hard-coded file path. So I can show you this as well. But of course, you probably know that if I Control C, copy this still out on a Macquarie with the source one. But if I paste this inside or take a closer look in this, what's already there? You see this is a hard-coded file path, which is now pointing currently to the level up and there to the file itself in this folder. So what we could do as a best practice is just, instead of doing this now manually for each of the 3 sheets we have here, right? And of course, if you have maybe 10 sheets, you would have to do it manually for 10 of those. We could work with parameters. So if you have not done this so far, then this is a very good tip, at least for my site, and also it's considered best practice. So let me just go back in here and let me just put this originally Control X in here. And paste it in here. That's where it was, of course. And now if I go in here and now I try to click on close and apply. Then this time, this of course should work. So if I click on refresh, now actually everything is fine again, right? Because now the file is again in the source location. So what we want to do is the following. We go to transform data, and this should be done optimally when you first load the data inside your reports. But still you can still modify it later on as well, if you already have a published and finished report. So let's go inside in here, and there is a managed parameter option. So this managed parameter allows you here to either manage parameters which already exist, or go to this new parameter to create a new parameter. So if I click on new parameter here, you can see that there are my parameters. And then I can specify here for instance a name, and let's call this, for instance, a source, or location, or whatever you want to call it. So if you click on the file, you can specify the file type in here, depending on what kind of parameter you want to create. In this case, it's a text because it's a specific location. So I can use text in here and then I can put in a value. Now to get this value, I actually go in here and I'm using my original file path. Which is this one currently, right? So that's where the file is located. So in this case, I'm using the whole file path. Maybe depending on the use case, you only need the specific part of it, right? So for instance, maybe the name or anything like that. So let me just copy this one for now and then let's go here and then put the current value here. Like that and then click on OK. And now we have a parameter here, which is called source and this can be modified. So if I now go inside my sheets in here, I could actually now modify my code. So I can go to the other hand editor here and instead of using file contents and then this hard code value in here, I could actually put in my parameter. So remove everything in quotes, including quotes, and I simply use the source here. So source and you find I have two sources here. So you see that this was not best practice because now I have an issue here. Because the source step, which is called source, is the same as the parameter I named source. Which is not very good. So let me just click on console here for now, discard it. Yes. And let's go in here to parameter and it's actually modified. So we can go to parameters here and say we want to edit parameter. So edit parameter. And in this case, sorry, we want to manage it. The edit is just changing the source path. That's not what we need to right now. Go in here one more time. Go to manage. That's where we want to go. And here we have our original window back and this time I just renamed it this year. So let's call this location. OK. So just use it something which is unique, but also at least you need to understand and ultimately other people also understand what's actually referring to. So click on can also file locations. Maybe a better word for that. But for now, let me just click on OK. And so we got our location here. Let's go back inside our query. Let's go to the advanced editor here and you can see excellent workbook. Just remove everything inside the quotes. So refer to the file and put it now location. So if you type in location, you see that this will automatically picked up because we have created the parameter. So you can click it location, no syntax errors. And of course, we can click on done or because I want to maybe speed this a little bit up. I can actually copy this one here, Ctrl C, copy it, click on done. So that's fine. Now go to the oldest, go inside the advanced editor and just put everything here, which I have in here. So remove this one here and also put this in here. So we'll see. Click on done. This is also fine. And now go to suppliers. Also go to advanced editor here and also remove the hard-coded part here. So what we do is basically just remove again or replace actually the string or the text, which is inside the quotes, including the quotes and put in our location inside. We just want to paste this in here because of things that's a little bit faster. So click on done and everything is fine. So that's always a very good check to see that. And now if I click on close and apply, then we still have our data in here. That's fine. But now if I just go in here and say I want to go inside my folder here. In this case, I'm using my training file, Ctrl X to cut it, I put it in a new location. Could be anywhere, but in this case, it's just this folder. And then if I try to refresh this here, click on refresh. We see where again, we get an error in here, but this time it's much easier to change. So now let me just go to its own some data here, click on edit parameter. And now we can see here it's currently referencing the original file path. Now if I go in here and just type in this case, / and type in our location change. Location change because that's a no file path in here. And now if I click on OK, and click on apply changes. Now you see that the data loads correctly. And now of course, everything is fine in our report. And that helps us now using this parameter to quickly change all the references to the specific file. And instead of doing it manually, we now could do it in one step in here. And this also of course helps our colleague. If he or she needs your report, you send him to her. And if he or she wants to open it and test a file on a different location, then it's quite easy actually to change it just in one place. And then everything works fine. So that's it for this tip. So it's a best practice. So I'll consider doing this when you develop your reports, if you have Excel included. Okay, or maybe any other resources one. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that was helpful. And thanks a lot for watching. And I can't wait to see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. So maybe a small addition to the last video where we learned best practice to use parameters to referencing your sources. Now there are actually two things you can do now when you send the file to someone else. The first one would be that you save it as a PBIX file, which is a normal way to save files, and then send it to him or her to your colleague. The other way is to store it as a PBIT file. So if you heard of it, great. If not, let me just quickly show you what it does. Now if we save it as a normal Power BI file, so class just click on the save button, then of course next time someone opens this file, then he or she would see exactly this file. On the other hand, if we click on, in this case F12, let me just click on F12 and click on Save As, but this time as a file type is not PBIX, instead it's PBIT. So if I click this option here, you see that there is now PBIT file and T stands for template. But let me just save it as a template. Let's call this maybe lecture for template. Okay, and just put up all of this here and just save it as a PBIT file. I click on save like that, and then I can give it a description if I want to do it. Just say template. Okay, of course, feel free to come up with better and more explanatory things here. But let me just click on OK for now. Okay, now I saved it, and now let me just open this so you can see what this actually means. So now when you send the PBIT, the template file to someone and he or she opens the file. Let me just do that. So let me double click on the template for you to open it. I click on the template and I just wait here, data gets loaded. And now we can see a different behavior, because for the template, you can see here, there is no preview of the data. We don't see the report, we just have to now first enter the location path. So you see here is the description template. So it should be a little bit more context than just one word. But you can give it here exact and description what for instance the report will receive or should do. Maybe put your own location to the file where you store it, and then you can just paste in the file path. In this case for me, it's just this one here. And of course I need to get rid of the quotes in here. Let me just go on here and here. I still have the quotes inside of that. And now let's click on load. And then you see the data gets loaded. Might take a little time, but now we have here our report, right? And now we can see the data. So that is the difference between the normal PBIX file and the PBIT file. PBIX just means that you send the report, and if someone opens the report, then he or she will see the data. But of course then as soon as the data gets refreshed, then of course you need to modify the file paths, the location. And if you send it as a PBIT file, then of course before you see anything inside the file, you first need to, in this case, because we set up this parameter, first need to modify the specific file path, and then only then if the data is there, you can see the data. Okay. So that's it for that. So a little addition to the last video, I think that's also quite helpful. And if you have not used the files, the PBIT files are fired, maybe there's an option for you Okay. So thanks a lot for your attention and hopefully see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now let's explore another problem which arises when we have several Excel files we want to combine together in a folder. So let me just show you what the issue is. I have here two Excel files, which is in this case input 1 and input 2. So and these are just very small files in here. You can see that I get a rating in here, I get a year and a game, which in this case is Witcher 3 of course, and there's Great Fall, just 2 games. So the data itself is quite easy, but it doesn't matter if it's complex or has multiple columns or does the 3, the problem itself is the same. So this is the first file, and normally if we would have, let's say, 10 different files but they all have the same structure, we could load the data with files from folder right and power way. But let me show you what the issue is here. My second file here, which in this case is this input 2, if I double here and have a look at the data, I'll see that I also have game, rating, year, but also have drinks. So I have an additional column in here. Also, I just wanted to point this out, just let you see that if I go to my first file here, that the column order is different, right? Just wanted to mention that there is game, rating, year, drinks, and there is rating, year in game. So this is what the data looks like. So let's actually get this into PowerWay. So let's say in this case get data in this case not from Excel file, but we need to have it from folder. So there's an option, if you go to more and then we just wait for the window, here it is, and then there's this great option from folder, which is great to handle multiple files, but actually only if they really have the same structure. So if I go to connect here and there, now I need to specify a folder path. Let me just copy my path from here. This case is this one, Control C, copy it. I go in here and I paste by folder path inside, then I click on OK and then I just wait, and as you can see I get 2 files in here which are binary, which is true, these are Excel files. I can see the extension and then there's an option to click on combine, and what happens if we use this option, which is great to have, but still what happens is that Power BI, or to be more specific about the Power Query Editor, creates a function for us, and this function uses one of the files as a reference, as a kind of template, and then tries to actually do the same and apply the same transformations on all the files, and this will be a trouble for us. But let's actually first try to combine those. You can combine and let's say combine and transform data, right? Let me just go to the query editor maybe first in here. So now we have in this case the option to combine the file. We have the files, this is table 1, and you can already see I need to specify a sample here, so I can now choose in this case what I want for my sample. But let's say here it's input number 1, which is the first file currently, and if I do that and select the table, I can see I get my rating, I get my year in my game. But remember, the second file also had an additional column which is drinks, which is not part of the first file, and the file we choose here as a sample file will be the file which Power BI uses to create the function. That means if I click on OK, now click on OK and then we just wait, there's our window editor. So let me just actually show this to you. Currently it's in the background probably, so I go in here, there we go, and we see that here we got our input, which in this case from file number 1, from file number 2, and we got the columns rating, year, and game. So what I'd like to mention here is, remember that the order of the columns was different, but still Power BI is here able to pick up the right order of the columns depending on the name we had. So even though the rating was maybe on a different column in the second sheet, we still have them now here mapped correctly together, so that's fine. But what about the drinks column? Remember in the second file here I had one additional column which is drinks, but this drinks column here, which in this case energy drinks, but that doesn't matter, this drinks now is not included, because what Power BI did as a set, it uses a sample file. In this case the sample file for us was the first input. We had the option to choose also the second one if you want, but based on this Sample file, the transformation was done and the files were combined, so this means that always if the file we choose for the transformation using the files from photo option does not contain all the columns, then of course these columns which are not included in the sample file will also be not included when we combine them using this transformation. Now in our case, of course, we could argue and say, well, we have the second file and this contains drinks, so we could have chosen the second file, which is true, you're right, but what if you have a third file which again has different columns? What can we do then, right? Because we only can choose one of the files regarding this approach, so this is exactly the issue, and in the next video we cover how we can actually well solve this issue for us. Okay, so hopefully you're interested and excited, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now, in the last video, we have seen how we can use the from folder option, which is a great option if you have files with the same structure. But if that's not the case, how can we now use this in a more dynamic way? So the way it works is the following. Let me first actually close this for now. Let's close this. And not now. I don't want to apply the changes. Let me go back in here and let me discard everything. Yes, I want to discard it. And I want to start from scratch. Here we go. Now first and foremost, I need to get my data again. So I can click on Get Data. In this case, one more time, I go to More and I'm still using the From Folder option, but a little bit different. I click on this one, go to Connect, and then I need a folder path. The folder path itself is, in this case, again, my folder, which I'm referencing in here. I click on OK. And then there is data itself. And then I will use all these other files. So but this time, let me actually do it a little bit different. Let's click on Transform Data. And again, I have my two binary files, but this time we're going to handle those ourselves. And don't let Power BI do this automatically. So in order to extract the data from binary files, we need to have a function to do this. And there's a function in Power BI, which is called Excel.workbook. That means that I could actually add here a new column if you go to Add Column in here. And go to, in this case, Custom Column like that. Then we can create a column here. In this case, I just type in Excel, this is correctly .workbook. So this is the function. And if I open the parentheses, I just need to put in in this case, contents, because the content column contains the binary. So if I double click here and I close the parentheses here, that's basically the formula. So let me just copy this and let's go to my editor. Let me just remove everything here and paste this. That's the function. So Excel.current workbook. So actually, this is current workbook because it's current workbook, but actually it should be Excel.workbook should also work. This should be the function Excel.workbook and then the content. So let me just copy this. And let's go in here. Let me just paste this instead of current workbook. I'm using the workbook function, which is a little bit more broad. So you can see there are no syntax errors. Let's click on OK. And you see that we have a new custom column in here, which contains table, and the table itself contains the data. So the name of the sheet also that it's a table. And this case that item is a table and that is a sheet. So now what we could do is remove everything we don't need. And what I want to keep is actually only the name and this custom column for now. But before I do this, I can also expand the column. So if you click on the two errors here, click on that. And you see that let me just untick this original column is prefix because this would just mean that I have now custom.name, custom.data and so on. I go and I'll get rid of the custom. So I untick this option here and I click on OK. And now we have extracted actually the data inside the table. As you can see here, which is the item, the sheet, and so on. So all these things in here. So interesting, of course, for us is the data column because this contains the table and the table as you can see down here. It's a little small, but this is actually the original values inside the table. So we need to get this data, but currently see there's also another issue that the headers here are not promoted. That's also something we need to actually clean up first. So let me go back and actually remove everything we don't need. So all I want to keep is actually the name in this case, which is input 1 input 2. We don't need to keep it, but I'd like to actually know where the data is coming from. That's why I want to keep this column here. And I also want to keep, of course, this column contains the data, which is the data column. So if I hold my control key and select both of them, so select the first one or control key, select the second one, then we can right click on one of those and say we want to remove the other columns. Let's get rid of the other ones. So we only have the name in here and actually the original data in here. Next we want to add an additional column. We could also write it directly in the M, but I think with the additional column, it's easier, I think. So if I go to custom column one more time and this time, let's just call this maybe we want to promote the headers, promote headers. And this is just what we want to try, or what we do now is the following. You can see here currently the data inside the table. And just to mention this, if you want to see what's inside this table here, this item, don't click on the table directly, click next to the table, OK, where it's empty space. Because if you do this, then you see here a little preview. And you see that there's a rating column, the year column and the game column, exactly what we would expect. But currently this is not the header, the header's column 1, column 2, column 3. And what we want is actually we want to have the first row inside the header, like the promote headers option, which exists inside the query editor on the transform as well. But in this case, we need to do this for each table. So for each row in what we have. So in this case, we have 2 files, but if you have 10 files, we would have to do it for each table of each of the 10 files. And there is a function actually in an M code, which is simply table dot, in this case, it's called promote headers, there it is. So you can just use this, click on it, and now it's doubled, presented tab, he would also work, just be aware that this whatever that. So table.promote headers. And then we again do the same as the 50 Excel.workbook, we just put in parentheses. And you can see here, it actually needs a table. And in this case, inside the data column, we have tables. So we just need to reference our data column. So if you double click here, and close warrant this is here, you see that there are no syntax errors. And just to show you this a little bit bigger, just imagine this here. So let me go on here. So this time, what I'm using is this function here, table.promote headers for the data. So that just means going each row of our current table in Power Query, and then just promote the headers for the table itself. And if we do this, if I click on OK, now we see that we have a new column in here. And again, take a look. This was the original one with column 1, column 2, column 3, and then the names. The headers. And if I take a look at this one, click again, not on the table, but next to the table, you see that now we have the header actually now in the first row, also the first row as a header. That's what I meant. So if you click to the next table, you can see that there's a game rating here, and then there's the drinks column. So that worked. That's fine. So now we can actually get rid of this one here. So right click here and say remove. OK. And now actually I'd like to go inside this column here, it's a promote headers column. And now I want to extract actually the original names of the columns. So to do this, let me actually maybe duplicate this. So this is just one query currently. Let me just go in here. So we want to continue working with this. I need to duplicate it here, referencing, which just reflect. And now let me click on duplicate reference here does not work because we want to modify this one later on without modifying our duplication. That's why I want to duplicate it here. So click on duplicate here. And now we have a second query. Now for the second query, I actually want to get rid of in this case, this name here. So click on the table. That's fine. So click on get rid of the name, right click remove. And this time right click here and say click drill down because currently this is still a table. You can also see it with the table icon here and I want to convert this into a list. So I can right click here and go to in this case, drill down this one. And now I have a list column here. So a list and there's a table. So first one and this is the second one. Okay. So now we get our lists. And now in our last step, we want to apply a little bit of M code in order to get all the column headers from this case, those two files, but of course, if you have more than just two files, it would be exactly the same steps we're going to do now. So to do this, let's actually maybe rename this here. So I can right click here and click on rename here and call this for instance here extract headers, extract headers. Okay. That for instance, so now we have here renaming. So let's actually go back to the home here and say, I want to go to the advanced editor. And here I'd like to actually now here go from my promote header step. So let me put in a comma here because only the last step does not include the commas or the other steps can include commas. And here I want to write something. So this case, I named the step and I name it maybe in this case, all headers, all headers. Here, that's my step. Of course, you can name this one if you like. And just a minute, I'll show you this in Notepad. So you can see that on the bigger screen that here, but it's equal to and just in case you wondering, you can see here there's a pound symbol and then those exclamation marks for all the steps. If you don't have any spaces in the name of the current step, you don't need to have the pound symbol and the quotation marks. Those are only necessary if you have any kind of spaces in between like that. Then I would have to write a pound quotation mark. If I have it just one word together, that's not required. And now what I want to do is I want to apply, in this case, a few functions. So I want to extract the column names from each of those tables. And then I want to combine them. And to do this, combining them means I need to union them means I can use list.union.union. So it's just a function on a list and we currently have a list column. So we want to union and what do we want to union? Well, we want to use the column names. And this can be done by calling list.transform because in order to union the column names, we first need to extract them from each of the tables we have. And this can be done using transform because transform applies a transformation. So a function on each element of the list. So let's do that. We need to put in here a list. And the list itself is in this case our last step, which is called here promote headers. This one. So let me just copy it from here, Ctrl C, Ctrl V to paste it here. And then I put in a comma in here. And I want to apply it on each of the tables I have in the list. That's why I can't call the each keyword. It's a special keyword. That's why it's now in here in blue. And what I want to do is for each the transformation, I want to apply for each of the tables is simply table dot, in this case column names. So there's a column names option this one. And then I just need to tell it, okay, the column names of which table. And because I want to use each of the tables in here, there's a shortcut for that. Simply put it an underscore here. And then of course, in our last step here, so our output, the ingest reference is the output. And the output should not be the step, but the last step. That's why we go in here and I can put in all header instead of this one. Because depending on what we put in here, which of the steps do we want to see as the output? We can then reference also an earlier step if we want to do that. But in this case, I want to have the last one. So let me just copy this one to show this to you because this is the part we have adjusted. And that's actually click on done just to see that this works. We see that here we got a list now with all the different kinds of column names from all the files we have. In this case, we have 2 files and we have rating year game and also drinks, which is only part of the column is only part of the last file. And now if I just let me show this to you first, let's go in here and let me just paste this inside. So that's what we did. We added another step, which is all headers. Just be aware, if you add the step, please make sure that in the last step you have before put in a comma at the end, because the only step which does not contain a comma at the end is the last one. And because we added this step here, only this one doesn't contain a comma at the end. So what we did is we used the union function lists union. And what do we want to combine? So union, we want to combine all the column names. So for each table, we extract the column names. So each underscore refers to each entry we have in the data set. So in this case, each of the elements and the list of transform just means that we apply a function, which is this column names function on this case, the last step we have. And for each element of the last step, because we have the underscore, it's, well, you have to get used to it, right? I admit that, but still hopefully you understood what we did, and to get this result, we want to apply. So now we have actually here our list with all the names, so extract has, and this list. Here, this end result. So these all had us here, this can be used now also in our original query, because if we go back to the original query here, we have now the option, of course, to go in here. Like that. And we could extract this. So we could say, I want to now select the columns I have. In this case, all of them, that's fine. I can say, yes, please extract columns, click OK, and we have it here. But this is an issue, because so far we could do this without the step we have done here with the extract headers. But the problem here is here, promote headers here, just means that now we're referencing rating year game drinks, and then rating year game drinks. So that means this would work as a folder here if we load this, but it would also result in an error if the column changes, because let's just do that first. OK. Let's click on close and apply. For now, let's apply. We load the data, and we'll see that now we have here also the headers here, because we also loaded them, could exclude this from the loading, but for now for the folder structure, we have drinks, game, name, rating, and year. So far, we have all these columns. We didn't adjust any data type so far, but we can see the columns at least. So that's fine. But what if now, if I go to the file, in here, for instance, for the input to, I double click here, and now I have another column. Let's say this case, this column is food, okay, food here, and the food is, let's say, whatever we want. I like to have now maybe a burger, right, burger, and something else, whatever. Right? So let's say pizza, okay, I like pizza, so let's go with pizza. So let me just save this. In this case, we get now a new column here. So let me just pick the smaller here, and let's me go in here, and now let me click on refresh. Click on refresh here, I refresh the data, and you see that this works fine, but the problem is that we have a new column, right, and this new column, I can't see it here. So where is the food column? And you see that we have exactly currently, at least, the same issue as we had with the combining files from FODA. So this was not successful for us, right? So we have not included the new column. But what if we do the following? Let me actually go first. Let me just reopen this file, and let's actually get rid of this food one more time, remove it to have original data, and then we just save this, Ctrl S to save it, let me close it, and let's go in here one more time, let's click on refresh, okay, that works fine. So now let's go back to our transform data, and let's just modify one last thing. So we had a lot of work, at least a little bit of work, to use this specific function. In M, right, to extract a list of the column names. So this list is called extract headers, because it's the last step. Now if you go back to the FODA here, and now we just say table.expand columns, and instead of referencing here these promote headers, it's just a name, these ones here, so these ones and these ones, why not say now, at least for us, we just reference what we had in our, in this case, extract headers, this one here. So let's actually get rid of that, and that should move everything in here, which is hard coded, right? So we just have hard coded values, and this is actually the issue, so we don't have an option to get the new updates from the columns. And now let's put in extract here, extract headers. So this one here. So this is now our modification. So instead of saying directly, we want to have rating year game and drinks, we just say we want to have extract headers, which is, in this case, referencing this list, and this list is dynamic. And I'm going to show you this in a minute. So at first, let's actually here, put this here, click on checkbox here, and you see that this works, click on close and apply for now. And we see that here we got actually the columns here, and we can still use them, so that's fine. But now let's actually try what I showed you just a minute ago. Let's actually go in here, go to my folder in here, and let's go to the second file. And now let's actually add the food column one more time. Let's go with food in here. And this food column now contains, for instance, here as a sad pizza and burger. So let me just save it, Ctrl S to save it. And let's close to make this smaller here. Let's actually get rid of that. Let me close it, otherwise I could run into an error because the file is still open. So now it's saved, including the food. And let's just see what happens in here. So if I click on now refresh the data, click on refresh. And you see that now we have a new column, which is called food. And this is automatically now part of our query. So now if the underlying data changes and a new column is added in one of the sheets, and it doesn't matter which one, could be input number 1, input number 2, it doesn't matter. But we still have now this specific column referenced here. The same is true, of course, if a column gets removed. So for instance, currently you see that there's a food column. And maybe you are aware, maybe not. But if you use the normal way to import the data in Power BI and you remove a column, then you also run into errors because the column is referenced in steps. And if Power BI is not able to find this column anymore because you have removed it or someone else has removed it, then of course you also run into errors. And also this can be handled now because we added the food column, and you see that the column appears if we refresh the data. But also if I go in here, and let's say I want to get rid of the food column again. Get rid of the food column, remove it. And let's just save this for now, Ctrl S, save it. And let's just close this here. And let me just show you that this also works. If I now refresh the data, refresh, you see that the data gets refreshed, the food column gets removed, and again we have no issues. And this is a much more dynamic way, even though of course it involves a little bit of M code, I admit that. But still, now we have the data here inside Power BI. And of course, now we can dynamically change the data set without running into errors here. Right? The only thing which you need to be aware of is, and I'd like to point this out as well. If you go to transform data in here in the last step, that currently you see that expand columns here, this last one, currently the data here is not, well, has not assigned a specific data type in here, right? So this of course you could do, but this is something where you need to be aware of. If you do that, then this step is hard-coded again. So I would only advise you to do this at the end of the query, right? To adjust here the data types. But as I said, this is a dynamic way to make sure that we have less errors than normally. Especially if the data changes, and also it's a much more dynamic way than the files from folder. As I said, files from folder is a great way if the data is the same, but if the structure changes between the files, then you've seen that there are issues, and if also the files are more dynamic because you add columns or you move columns, then this way could help you actually to avoid running into errors. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Next video. Next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now let's explore one of the most often seen issues when it comes to creating measures and calculate columns in Power BI, which is the so-called circular dependency error. So maybe you have experiences in your own projects and you did not know what actually happened and why it happened. So let me just show you when it appears and how we can solve it. So at first, you can see here I have my file open, and the file just contains my 3 tables. Always orders and suppliers. You can use your own file. So all I did was just importing the tables here, and this is just a basic visual which is inside. So let's go to the data view here, and in here, let's refer to the orders table. Okay, it's already selected, and if you select the table, then also the table tools appear up here, and now I want to create here a new column. So it will be a calculated column. So let me just click on new column here, and let's call this total sales column. Okay, total sales column like that is equal to, and let me go shift enter a new line. And what I want to do is I want to iterate here through my table, and I want to multiply the selling price times the amount just to get the sales, because it could also refer to the sales column in here, but let me just iterate here using selling price and amount. So let's say I want to calculate. Okay. And this is crucial here that we use the calculate to see or to get the circular dependency error. So let's say we want to calculate the sum x because we iterate. Remember always, if you iterate over a table, meaning go row by row to the table, you need the x functions or the filter function. Filter function is also an iterate function. So sum x, and now we are referring to the selling price or first table. Sorry, sum x first table, the orders table in here. And then now we use the selling price, so selling price, and then we can multiply this by the amount. Here we go. So let me close this, and let's close also the calculate function, and yeah, now press enter. So we can see that the total sales column here is fine, right? So we can 60, 486 and so on. And of course, if you would multiply here in this case, the amount 24 times 2.5, then you should derive a 60. So that's fine. Okay. So let me just check this here, and now let's create another measure. Let's say an indication. Okay. Let's say just if the sales are greater than 200, then it is high sales, and if it's below 200 and slow sales, for instance. So let's do that. Let's create a new column in here and let's call the sales classification. Column for each of the orders. So row by row and column, let's spell it correctly. Column is equal to. Let me go to my line and now let's say if in this case, and I'm referring to the total sales column. So total sales column, if this orders total sales column, if this is greater than a set 200, just use any kind of value you want, then it should be high. So let me put in a high in here, high sales for instance, and otherwise if this is wrong, then I want to use low seats. So put it in quotes. Let's close this and we would expect normally that everything works fine. Right. So let's give this a try, but actually check this box and you see that a circular dependency was detected orders in here. Right. So obviously we are not able to create this column. We can see a little triangle here as a warning because this has currently an error. So still let me just check that. Okay. Obviously we get an error in this measure. So why does this happen actually right now? Well, the problem is actually the total sales column, this one here. And actually what's quite interesting is actually if we tried the following, if we to copy this here, Control C the copy it so we don't need to, well, it's actually use everything, Control C the copy it. And let's create a new column. Let's go in this case again to this case table tools here and I want to create a new column. And if I would try to paste this in here, and of course I need to rename it because the columns can't have the same name. But if I say this is total sales column number 2, for instance, and I would say, okay. Let's check that in here. And you see we also get a circular dependency error. So why is that? I mean, think about it. The first time we created it, it worked without any errors. But the second time now we have an error and it tells us the same as in the sales classification column that the circular dependency was detected, or this column, or this total sales column, or this column. So it's obviously an issue with the total sales column. So why is that? We have created the column here. It worked. We tried this one. This did not work. And then we just copied the same measure in this case. I mean, it's a calculate column, but you'd see the same tax expression to another column. And obviously right now it does not work anymore. So this is strange, right? So why is DAX doing this? Well, the answer in this case lies inside the calculate function and this calculate column. Here. What calculate does is it leads to a context transition in Power Behind. And context transition, I covered this in another course, but the main idea is, if you already know that each row in a table, so the context transition means that row context gets transferred into filter context. It means that each column for each row in a table becomes the new filter context. This means that, in this case, for the first total sales calculation for this one here, the filter context is actually all the columns in here, right? All the columns for this specific row. So for each of the rows, each of the columns is a filter context. And that's how Power BI is then able to actually calculate here the correct numbers. Now, of course, if each column is part of the filter context, when context transition happens, and context transition always happens with calculate function, then of course, this leads to errors when we want to add additional columns, because those additional columns will also become part of the filter context. And this actually the issue which appears here. So how can we solve this? What's the solution? Well, so the solution is that we need to make sure that if we add additional calculate columns like this one here, we need to get rid, actually, of at least this column for the filter context. So let me just maybe this one we can remove for now. Let's actually right click here and say, I want to actually delete this. Yes, I want to delete it because we can also see the issue with we will phone column this one here. There's still an issue. But now let's fix this. And the solution is, in this case, this one. So if you go to the total sales column here and you just modify this a little bit, just to make sure that this calculation here does not affect here our new column which we add here, the sales classification column. So we can do this by simply add here an additional context, in this case, the filter here, because calculate always requires an expression, and then we modify the expression by the filter here. So by this additional filter, and this filter is always a table. And there's also a calculate modifier like remove filters, for instance, right? And we can do that. We can say remove filters. And then we just need to refer to what kind of filters do we want to remove. And in this case, we want to remove the filter which is applied on the sales classification column. So if I say sales classification column, this one here, and I press tab like that. Okay. Now we need to close, of course, also the calculate function. And let's just see what happens now to the sales classification column if we do this. So let's press checkbox, press enter. Okay. Here we go. And now let's go one more time to the sales classification here. Okay. And now let's actually click on the checkbox here, check it. And you see, obviously now this works. So obviously the circular dependency error is not there anymore. And the answer or the explanation for that one more time is that if we use the calculate function here, we implement context transition. And context transition means that the row context, the filter context gets, the row context gets transferred in the filter context. That's what, okay. So that means that in this case, for each row, each column is the filter context. And because this depends as a filter context on this measure, and this measure is based on the total sales column. So we have a circular dependency between those two columns. And to break this circular dependency, that's what we can do. So we can remove the filter context in this case from this column here. And this means that the sales classification column is now not dependent on the total sales anymore. And that's why we don't have a circular dependency anymore. And that's why we now have the correct numbers here and don't have any issue anymore. Okay. So this is just one example where circular dependency can appear. There are other examples as well. But this is one. And just in case you experiences in your projects, then now you need to know how to fix it. Okay. So hopefully that was interesting to you. As always, thanks a lot for watching. And I can't wait to see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. So another way to solve the circular dependency error we have seen in the last video is using another function. Instead of using remove filters, we could also use the all except function. But only under one condition. We need to have a unique identifier. In this case, as you can see here, I have an order ID, but the order ID is not unique. As you can see here, because some orders, in this case some of the sales belong to the same order ID. This means it is not unique, and this means that in this case, I can't use this. So just to show you that this would also work with the all except, I'm gonna add an index column using the Power Query Editor. But for now, let me just show you that it would not work without, or if you refer to the order ID right now. So if I use all except here, all except, and then inside the orders table here, inside orders, referring to this case, the order ID, so if I search for ID, there's the order ID, this one, like that, I can close this here. And then I also need to close the calculate function. And let me just get rid of this for now, for x. And if I try now to save this, press the save button here, then you see that we got actually a calculation, but this calculation is wrong. As you can see here, 60 is fine, but then we have 1821, which means obviously because you can see the same value here and here. Obviously now it's summing up multiple rows in this case, simply because context condition is happening and removed in this case here, the order ID. So to make this work actually in here, we first let me just go back to my sales classification measure, I'll sign it from my sales column, this one here. And instead of using all except here, orders, and order ID, refer back to our remove filter function, remove filters, and we want to remove the filter from the classification column. Like that. And then we need to close the calculate function. And let's check the box and we see that we get the correct values in here. So just a second, click this here, and you see that now we get the correct values again. So now if we would have a unique identifier column, like an index here, for instance. So let's do that. Let's go to home and then click on transform data here. And let's go to the orders table, here we go. And let's add an index column, it's quite easy to do. If you go to add column here and say we want to add an index column, so starting from 0. For instance, now we have an index column here, which is a unique column, right? So unique for each of the rows. So now let's actually go to home and click on close and apply. OK, and we just wait a little bit, there it is. And now we should have an index in here, which is this one, which is unique for each of the rows. And now if we try to use total sales column here, calculate some X orders, setting price times around, but instead of using remove filters, we actually remove this for now. So let me just copy all of this, Ctrl X. And now use the all except function, all except. And in this case, we are referring to the orders table, but now what we want to get rid of is, or what we won't accept is the index, okay, index itself. That's closest. And then also close a calculate function here. And let's just see that that works. So we can see the values 60, 486 and 500. And if I now press the checkbox here, now we see 60, 486 and 500 and so on. So obviously, as you can see here, now these are the same values as we had before. Okay, so that's it just for a solution with all except. There's another solution. And this would be actually my preferred solution. So the better one, if you have a unique identifier as we have with the index column here, create it. If you don't have it and have sales, for instance, belong to the same old ID as we have seen here, then don't do this because this will lead to, of course, errors as you have seen. Because some of the columns then which belong together will be aggregated using all except. Okay. So that's it for this additional video regarding circular dependency. So it's up to you and also depends on the data set, what you want to use. But you've seen when this happens with calculated columns and how to avoid it. Okay. So that's it for this video. Thanks a lot and see you in the next video. Next. Hey friends, welcome to the second part of the circular dependency problem. Now in the last two videos we have seen what happens if we create calculated columns, which might depend on each other as soon as we have context transition, and when this happens. Then of course we have the error as we've seen, and we have learned two solutions how to fix it depending on the data. But what if we have another circular dependency error regarding the connection of tables? Let me show you what I mean. So let me go to, in this case, the model view, and currently you can see that we get an orders table, we get a suppliers table and an employees table. and in the suppliers table we have suppliers from various different countries. So if I go to the data view in here and check my suppliers, click on this one, we see that here we got supply ID, we got a supplier name, and we got the country, which is UK, USA, and so on. Now let's say we filter the suppliers table so we only see suppliers from the United States. I could also choose Brazil, Germany, whatever. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create actually a table. So you know that in DAX you can create calculated columns as we've seen, but we also have the option to create complete tables. So if I click on new table here, so there's our table, and this will be, let's say, US suppliers. Suppliers like that is equal to, and I want to filter a table. Now the table is simply the suppliers table, so I can refer to the table using the values function. For instance, let's try that from the values first and then reference the suppliers. Suppliers, so values just gives us a unique list of suppliers in a table structure. So in this case, we got the suppliers, and now I would like to have here only the US suppliers. So I can reference to the country. So if I search for country, here it is, suppliers country, and this should be equal to USA. In this case, it's USA because that's how the US is spelled in the suppliers table. Now I can close this here. Okay, and now let's check the box or presenter, and you see that now we get a short list of our suppliers in this case, which only belongs to US. So all the suppliers coming from the US. Okay, so now let's do the following. Let's go to the model view here. Okay, so we got our new table, which is credit by DAX, right? This one here, and now let's try the following. Let's actually first we have here the supplier D, and we have here supplier D, right? So let's drag supplier D from the suppliers table to the US suppliers table like that. Drag and drop. Let me see that we got a one-to-one relationship, which is true, right? Because the US suppliers here, this DAX calculated table is just a subset of the suppliers table. So we should be connecting them each other, and it's a one-to-one relationship, which is also true. So what happens if I let me just delete the relationship here, click on yes. And now let's do it the other way around. I mean, that shouldn't make any difference, right? If I just use supplier ID from here and I drag this on the supplier D from this table. Here, I mean, it's exactly the same, right? But the first time we just dragged it from suppliers, and I'll drag it from the suppliers. From the US table, drag and drop. And you see that we get an issue here, create relationship, a circular dependency error was detected again, suppliers and so on, right? So what's the issue here? I mean, we've seen that if I drag the supplier D from here on there and create a relation, everything works fine. It's a one-to-one relation in both direction, okay. And it works. But if I do it the other way around, it does not work. So if I, one more time, drag it here from here, then I get the circular dependency error. So what's the problem? The problem, which appears here, is the way we have created the table. Because what we have done is we have used the values function. And let's check that here, click on this one here and let's actually zoom in, that's it. So the values function creates a list of unique values from the suppliers, but it also includes the so-called blank row. And because of the blank row created by the value function here, we run into the circular dependency error. So this is why we need to be very careful when we use the values function regarding this option here, because we've seen that this can create, it's not always the case, but it can create a solid dependency error. And the main goal for me here now is to show you that this can happen and to provide your solution, which might help you in your own projects later on. So when we, instead of using the values function, we can get rid of this so-called blank row, which gets created for the values function using two ways. The first one would be we use the all no blank row function instead of values, which means that we get rid of any blank row, which creates exactly the circular dependency. So if I tip this option here and we do the table, which is this one, suppliers, you say, okay, let's do that. Let's check this box. Okay. So that's our new formula. And now let's actually connect those two tables one more time. If I start from here, drag and drop it here. We see that this works without any errors, but now the other way around, the more interesting fact. So let's drag supply ID from here to the supply from here, drag and drop it. And let's see. And it works. You see that now this relationship works and we do not get the circular dependency error anymore. So that's the first solution for that. But let me also show you another solution. Click on delete. So okay. And now instead of using here the all no blank row function, use a different function, which is a so-called distinct function distinct here. This is the function and the distinct function is more or less exactly the same as the values function with one important difference. And you probably guessed it already. The distinct function also does not include this blank row, which is created by the values function. And this means that with distinct function, we get exactly the same result as with the all no blank row. So let's check that. And let me show you that this is correct. Okay. So check the works. Okay. And now let's actually connect the supply ID to this one here. And that works same as before. But again, the other way round, let's check that because that's interest to us, drag this from to here. And we see that this works as well. So now you've seen two solutions for the problem. So if you have a table here and created the table index using the values function, we've seen that this can lead to circular dependency errors. So you've seen here. And the way to fix this problem in here, we've seen two solutions for that. So either we use the distinct function or we use the all no blank row function. And one more time. The reason why this happens is because the values function creates a so-called blank row in the table. And because of this creation of the blank row, this circular dependency arises. And to get rid of that blank row and to avoid the circular dependency regarding the connection, the relation between the tables, we have two options seen here. So that's part 2 of the circular dependency part. I think this, I hope this is really helpful to you because this is something I experienced a lot in projects and also I've seen from other people, if they calculate columns. Or in this case, if they have some kind of tables and create this relationship. And in both cases for the calculate columns, as well as here for creating tables and combining them via relationship, the circular dependency error can occur. And if that happens to you, then now have a look at those two videos and maybe that provide a solution for your problem. Okay. So thanks a lot for watching and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now let's explore another trick which might be helpful for your project if you have the structure I'm going to show you right now. So we all know that if you have multiple files in a folder, you can extract those files using these files from folder option if they have the same shape. Then we don't have any problems, right? But what if we have the following use case? We have a folder structure in here and I created this, which looks like that. I have here multiple folders and inside this multiple folders, let me just double click. Here, I have now 3 folders, 2021, 2022 and 2023. So this time we have multiple files. If I go in with one of these folders, you see that there is Q1, Q2 and Q3, Q4 for the year 2021. And the same is true for the other years. So for instance, in 2023, if I double click here, again, I have Q1, Q2, and here Q3, Q4. So that is the structure what the data looks like. And if I open this, let me just double click here, this is what the data looks like. Okay, it's just a simple example file. Of course, your files could contain much more data, but as long as the structure is the same, this will work for this trick. So the important fact here is that this time, all the columns are the same, right? So it's the same structure for all the different kinds of files we have. The main challenge is that this time we do not have all the files in one folder, but the files are separated by multiple folders. So the question is, how can we load all this data into Power BI? To end, of course, you want to be efficient, right? So we don't want to go from folder 3 times anything like that. So how do we do this? Okay, so let's just close this here and let's go back. Okay, and open Power BI. Here we go. And now let's explore that. So at first, we can go to get data here and I want to get the data from a folder, so I can go to more and then let's just wait until the window appears. There it is. And I'm choosing the folder, click on folder here, click on connect. And then we need the folder path. So let me go to my folder here and choose, in this case, let's start with turning the new one, go in here, Control C to copy this and let's go back to Power BI and Control V to paste it. So nothing new here, we just extract the data from the folder, click OK. And here it is. Now it shows us the binary files and this would mean we could combine the files and so on, but we instead would want to go to transform data. So click on transform data and open the query editor. Here we go. And we see that we got the folder path here and some additional information like when was the file created and so on. And also important to us here is this binary, because the binary file content contains the underlying Excel file. We see that if we click next to the binary, because then at the bottom, as you can see here, the file appears. Okay. So first we need to extract actually the content from binary. So to do this, we could use the Excel.workbook function. We already know this, but here, let me show this to you again. This is the formula you need, right? Excel.workbook and then referring the content column here. So let's do that. Let me go on here and say I want to go up here and add a column, click on, in this case, custom column. And then let's create it. Here's the custom column and let's actually use the Excel. Just paste it here, gay Excel, Excel.workbook. So there it is. The function, click on it and then open parentheses here, and now we need to put in the contents. We can either manually type it in or we could click on here and insert, or we can double click here or works, and then we need to close the parentheses here. So most syntax errors so far so good. Click on OK and here's our table column. And because the other information is in this case, right now, not relevant to us, I can simply right click here and say I want to remove other columns. So this is our table. If you click next to it, you see that this actually contains the information for the table. So let's actually go on here and expand this and check this box. You don't need this. Click OK. And now we got the two different tables here. And if you click next to the table, we see that that's what the data looks like. Now because this was not converted into a table up front, we see that currently it contains column 1, column 2, and column 3. So if this is already the year product and revenue, or in case you have different data, and your data is already the column headers, then you can avoid the next step. Otherwise, if the data looks like that to you, then you need to follow one additional step, which is promoting the headers. So let's do that, because in our case, I want to first have the year product and revenue as the column headers. So let's do that. Let's go under add column and add another custom column and say we want to promote the headers. So let's call this in this case table.promote headers, promote headers. There it is, a function, and I don't need to have it twice. Let's get up that. Okay. Table up from what it is. And then I put in here the data column which contains our table. So double check here and close this, right? And just to show this to you, let me just copy this and let me just paste it in here. Oh, there it is. Table to promote headers. That's what we do in here. The second command. Okay. Alright. So let's close this. And then let's actually click OK, and we see that we got another table in here. But this time, if you click on table, you see that the headers are promoted. And this is true for both of the columns. And that's what I want, because this means that when we combine those two tables, because they have the same column, the column header does not appear a second time below the first table. Okay. That's why we do it. So then again, we can right click here and say we want to remove the other columns because this is the only column we need. And then let's click the two arrows here and say we want to click OK, extract data. And now we see we got all the, in this case, 6 columns, 6 rows, we have in the 2 files in Excel, right? So we see we got all the data for 2021. So all the data, which is included in this specific folder here. If I go multiple folders here one more time, that's it. Right. 2021 to files. So Q1, Q2, and Q3, before, and we have all the data extracted. Alright. So this means we have now the 2021 data. But how can we now get also the 2022 data and 2023 data? Well, of course, we could do this 3 times and then we can use the append in Power Creditor to have all in one big table. But that's not what I want. I want to be a little bit more efficient. So to do this, we convert this transformation steps we have done here into a function, because if we convert it into a function, we can reapply it. So let's do that. Let's actually go inside our table here and inside, to be specific, more into the advanced editor, into our code. And there I want to actually add something here at the top. I like to add a variable, which means we simply put in open burn up this and then we specify the name, for instance, the file path. Okay. I name it file path and it's a text. So I say as text. And then I'm using an equal sign and a great symbol, a smaller symbol, depending on how you look at it. So, and this actually, that's what I put in front. And then I'm going to replace what's in here. So actually everything in here, I get rid of it. So let me just cut that out and here instead of putting the file path. So that's the transformation. And that's basically all we need to do to convert this into a function. Because the file path here is something we can give into this transformation step. So into this function. And then everything is done on the file path. So hopefully you can see that it's just really a bonuses and then file path or the name you want to give it as text closing parenthesis and then an equal and the arrow. So if I click on done now, you'll see that now this converts into a function. So we don't see the data anymore because now it's really a function itself, which has one parameter, which is 5/2. So of course, we can rename it as simply path or whatever we want to give this function. Let's say multiple folder extraction, okay, construction, like that. Okay. So that's our function. And you see that we have renamed it here, which encourage you to give it a proper name. And now what we need is we need to have simply a table, which contains all the 5 paths we want to extract. So to do this, we could either create an Excel, that would be one option, or we could do it manually in here. Now because I only have 5 paths, I can do it here as well. So let's click on enter data. And there's our table. And that's called this table. It's the paths. Okay, let's call it path. And then we need to put in here the path structure itself. So if I go to my folder here and I double click here, I copy this one, Ctrl C to copy it, and I simply paste it in here. So let's give this a name. Let's call this the F paths. Okay, 74 5 paths. Okay. And now I paste this inside. That's the first one. And I can make this a little bit bigger so you can see that I simply copy the 5 path in here. That's all for 2021 and do the same for 2022. So go on here, double click, let's say here, Ctrl C, Ctrl V to paste it. Okay, like that. And of course, I can paste it a third time and then just double click in here and just rename it here as well. So this is 2023 to be. So this means we got all of them and I don't need the full form. So this one should be deleted. Okay, here we go. So let's click on OK. And you see that there is now simply a table with our 5 paths. And what we can do now is simply invoke the function. So we can create another add column here, then this case invoke custom function. So let's do that. Now the column name could be anything. Let's get its custom. And here the function query. Well, I want to use the multiple folder extraction, which we created. And what is actually the path or the column? I want to apply this on. In this case, we only have one column. That's why it's pre-selected. If you have multiple columns in the table, then choose the specific column you want to apply it to. So let's do that for the 5 path. And this now means that each of the 5 paths is put as the parameter inside this multiple folder extraction. And as the 5 path here, as is variable, and then all the applied steps, which we've done before, is applied to the specific folder. And because the structure is the same, that's why I said at the beginning, this is important. Right? But the structure is the same. We can apply all the steps to all the files in exactly the same way. So if I click OK, now we got 3 tables. So the first one or 2021, 2022, and 2023. And now if we just go here and expand this, so let's actually use all the columns, click OK. And now we see we got the year here, which is 2021, 2022, and 2023. And we got all the products in here. And we also got all the revenue. Yep. From the sales column. Okay. Of course, we could also change the data type, which you should do the 5 paths. You could include it or not. It's up to you. I mean, I could go here and say, I want to remove this. And we can say, okay, year, for instance, this could be a whole number here. Product is a text. Let's do that here. It's a text. And the revenue here is, in this case, should be either it's a fixed decimal number because actually it's a, let's do that because it's a revenue. And then of course, if you go to home, click on close and apply and take a look at your report. Now you have all the data in the report from all the different kinds of folders, right? And now of course, you could say, okay, show me the year and show me the revenue for each of the product, right? So this could be now analyzed in Power BI the way you want it. But the main goal is now successfully achieved, which is simply extracting here data from multiple folders. So you see that you can also do this applying a function, which is a little bit more efficient. Of course, instead of doing this manually, especially if you have a lot of folders. So that's it for this trick. Hopefully that was helpful and can't wait to see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back. Now in this video, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into 3 new DAX functions because they are really powerful and help us developing DAX in a huge way. So I make things a lot easier. The first one is the offset function. The second one is the index function, and the third one is the window function. And these functions are available in Power BI version starting from December 2022, I think. So let's explore them. I already prepared the Power BI file, so I imported the tables, employees, orders, and suppliers. And I also added a DAX table, a dates table here. And this dates table is this time simply a DAX formula, which looks like that. It's already prepared. Normally in most of the projects, I'm using Power Query and the M code to create my table. But this time I did it in DAX because I want you, of course, if you have taken some of my other courses, to have both options available for you. Okay, so let's get started. At first we need to have some kind of sales measure. So that's why I need to, in this case, multiply. We already know that. In this case, I have a selling price here and I have an amount column here, which is up there. So I want to multiply those and create my measure, which is total sales. So let's right click on the orders table, click on new measure in here, and then let's write our measure, which in this case simply total sales is equal to, and I go to new line, pressing Shift Enter. And then I say this is simply sum x, because we iterate over a table. The table is the orders table. And I simply want to multiply the amount column, and I multiplied with the selling price. Okay. So I close this and we are good to go. So now we have our total sales measure. And of course, as the best practice normally, I would put this into a measures table, a dedicated measures table for better structuring. But I assume now you know how that works. So let's skip this for now and focus more on the DAX functions. So the first one is the offset function. So let's actually create maybe a little visualization. And in order to explore what a DAX function actually does and how it works, I think it's always best practice to have some kind of table structure, because then it's much easier to understand and see the numbers and explore what actually happens later on. Of course, you can use this in any kind of visualization, for instance, a bar chart or any other kind of chart you want. So let's actually maybe create a table for that. Click on table, and then let's use the categories. I have the categories in here. And it's also increased size a little bit. So I'm going here and go to the formula options and say for the style. And at first, I want to have none. I don't like the style here. And then also for the values, I actually increase this in size. So let's say this is, for instance, not 20 is too big, let's say maybe 16. Okay. Like that. So that should be big enough. So you can see that on the screens. Okay. So we get our different kinds of categories. And then let's also go to the total sales here and select. Let's make this dollar amount. Okay. And then let's click on take this option here. And now we see the number here. So actually this should not set to auto. So this should be actually only 2. So go to, and I think that's better. Okay. So we got 1.3 million in total sales. And now we can see here the total sales for each of the categories. So also I've skipped that, but I want to highlight this one more time. Go to the model view and make sure that the model when you build it is always set up correctly. And that all the relationships are in place. I got my facts table, the orders here, and I got my dimension tables. Okay. So now I get my report and I can see all the numbers in here. Now let's explore the 3 functions. Let's get started with the offset function. Okay. I make this a little bigger and then let's get started with offset. So let's right click on the orders table here and select new measure. And this measure is simply let's call this offset measure. OK. Measure is equal to I can hold the line. And because offset is like indexed and window as well, these are modifiers. So they actually create tables, but they are modifiers. That's why we need to use a calculate function. So calculate allows us to change, so modify the filter context of any of our expressions. In this case, we only have one. So referring to total sales. But of course, this would work with any kind of measure you have. So and then we need to put in the filter and the filter will be the offset. So there's the offset function. And then we need to specify a delta. Say the delta is we would like to have the prior row. So let's say the delta is -1. And then the table we're going to use is the category table, which we have here. So I can say all selected or selected. And then referring to the category or category, which means we want to offset all the categories. This is the table we want to apply the offset on. And then we can simply specify an order by if you want, blanks and partition, but we could also close it directly in here and also close the calculate function. So this is the offset function. And let's explore what it does. Press enter and go on here and click on offset, take this option. And you see that we get exactly what we expected because offset is simply the same way as in Excel. So we can offset in this case -1, which means we simply use the prior value. And this is really interesting because it allows us now to compare, for instance. Use the value of the, in this case, condiments, for instance, sales with a prior value. And the great thing is that this is dynamic, meaning I could also say I would like to have maybe the -2. So offset of 2. And you see that now it's shifted 2 times. So this is much more dynamic as we have done before, maybe with any kind of ranking column. Or an index column, which will also trick, we could apply that. Now for any kind of time intelligence functions, a lot of this we were able to do this easier because there were specific functions for that, right? So for date, ABS function, for instance, which would be a good to be able to create something like that dynamic. But for functions like category, for instance, any other kind of function, which are not belonging to date is what it was much more difficult and not as flexible as is here. And this -2, for instance, the number you specified here, you could also think of creating a parameter. So a variable in this case, and then choose the parameter and then based on the parameter, the offset changes. So you can make this dynamic if you want. And just to show you you could also, of course, use something like, for instance, one so positive value. And if you go here, now it's shifted, of course, positively, right? So you can see the one I'm 13 here, which is this value here. So this offers a lot of flexibility regarding comparing, for instance, different kinds of rows to each other, for any kind of dimension you have, in this case, for instance, a category. Right? So that's it for the offset function. Now, I said there are 2 other functions, which is the index function and the window function. And how do they differ considering the offset function? So offset allows us to, as the name implies, offset. So either positively or negatively. The index function works a little different because the index function allows us to compare the value to the value of a specific index. So let me show this to you. If I go in here and say, right, click on the oldest table and to be a little bit more, a little faster, that's actually copy, maybe everything here, right? Let's say, actually, I mean, let's go in here. Sorry for that. New measure. And let's say this is our index measure, okay, Index measure. Okay. So let's go to line, and again, I want to calculate something. So put in the calculate here. And what we want to calculate is one more time, the total sales or the measure you want to use. And then what I want is, in this case, index. Now I need to give it the position. Let's say the position is 1. Okay. And then I need to specify again, my table, which is one more time or selected of my category in my case, because that's what I have in my visualization. I can close this. And then again, I have optional parameters like order by and partition by and so on. I don't need to partition by because I only have one category column here, nothing more. So I can close this one more time and close it, then also the calculate function. I can press enter to evaluate this formula. And now I get my index measure. And let's put this inside. Go in here, click on index. And you see that this is what we get. So 251,000 and so on, but everywhere, meaning because we specified here the index as 1. We got the value from the first row. And we can now compare the value from the first row, which is cheese, with all the other categories we have, right? So we can simply, for instance, percentage figure of the 1 or 13 based on the 2021 or the difference, the absolute difference, or whatever we want to calculate. And of course, this again is dynamic. So I could also say here, for instance, to press enter and I get now the 1 on 13, or I could also say maybe -2. And then I get the 105, which is from the end -2, right? This one here. So again, this is a lot more dynamic than everything we had prior to that. And this allows us to compare each of the columns to a specific index. And that's how they differ from the offset, for instance, because offset is really offsetting the whole table in one of the other direction, and the index is returning a specific value. Right, which we can compare to the original value you have. So this is set for the index. And the third one, which is the most interesting, at least to me, is the window function. So let's explore this. Let's right-click on the oldest table, click on New Measure. And let's say this is our window measure. Of course, feel free up to come with any name you want. Press Shift-Enter, go to Moon Line. And let's say I want to calculate again, I'm using the total sales. So it's easier to understand, and we only have one measure. So there's not really a lot of option here for us. And now let's use the window function. Now the window function requires two values, the from and to, and also the type. The type is optional. So by default, I think I'm not sure if it's absolute relative. So you need to try it, but let's actually be specific here. Let's say we want to start from 0 and then we can specify a value. So if we specify, for instance, relative here, relative 0 and then to 0 and again relative, if we do it this way, and then we need to specify our table. So all selected. Again, I'm referring to the category here. I can close this. And I can also close, in this case, the window function, and I close the calculate function. So what do you think this will return from a window from 0 to 0 and both relative? So let's press enter and evaluate that. Okay, go here and let's take this option. And you see we got exactly the same values as for the total sales. Interesting. So why is that? Let's go back to the window. The reason why we get the same value is because we specified a window of 0 to 0. So actually only one column, one row. And because it's relative, it means that the relative 0 position is always in the current row we are. Okay, so 0 to 0 for dessert is desserts, and 0 to 0 for drinks is drinks. On the other hand, if we specify this differently, so we could say, and this is the interesting part here, their running total. So if we specify 1 to start from 0, but the 0 value will be absolute. So 0 absolute means that this time we start at the first, its case cheese, the first row. But because we set it absolute 0, it will always be 0. So the first row, in this case, cheese, and 0 relative on the other hand is then going each row by row and using 0 relative as this specific row. And this means we get a running total of cumulative sales in this case. So let me show you. So you see that this works. Click on the checkbox here. And now you see that we got started at 251, but then you got 365, which is simply the sum of those two, then 466, which is sum of those three, and so on. And of course, if that's true, then this value at the end must be the same value as the total value in here, which is true. And this allows us the window function in that way allows us to specify a specific window. We want to apply and compare it to, for instance, specific value or have it simply as the value next to the category in this. So if I go inside the window function here, and I can of course also work with absolute values here. So for instance, I could say relative here, and I could say absolute here. And let's say absolute for instance, 2, right? So 0 to 2 absolute. If I press enter and evaluate that, you can see it 365, which is simply then 0 to 2, which is simply the sum of those, right? So the sum of those three, in this case, 0, 1, 2, and this is simply the sum. And this is now shown everywhere because it's absolute. Or we could say, and let's say here it's 0, actually, let's say it's -1 relative. And then it's 1 relative, like now it's a press enter. And you see that now this is from -1 to 1, right? So 365, which simply this one included, or 466, right? Which is sum of those, or 395, which in this case, again, it's one more, 1 again. So these three in this case, but excluding the first one. So you can really be really dynamic and specific here what you want to use, what you want to apply. Or this one, since it's an 80, simply then sum of those two, because there is no plus 1 anymore because it's the last one. So -1, 0, and +1, but +1 is empty. That's why it's only go through, and it's an 80. So that's the window function. So you can see those functions are different. They belong together in a certain way, but they are different, and they have different use cases. And now you've seen what they can do for you, and hopefully you see already in your projects. Or in the future you might see and explore how those could help you developing that much faster and avoid using index and other kinds of hassles we have to add to in the past. So that's it for the functions here. I think I wanted to present them because they're really, really great and powerful, and they have been released at the end of last year. And if you have not used them so far, I highly encourage you to try them out. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next video. Hey friends, welcome back to this video. In this video, we want to find out how we can use ChatGPT in order to create or help us develop Power BI reports. Specifically, we want to use it in order to create DAX measures. So let's find out whether ChatGPT can help us. So at first, what I need is a Power BI file, and in this case, I'm using the Power BI Advanced training file. Again, as you advanced, but of course, you can use any kind of file you want and try it out, of course, with your own Power BI project as well. So in here, I have various tables that data has already imported, and I also have a few measures. And what I want is, For instance, I'd like to calculate total sales, but only those which have been achieved during the week. So I want to basically exclude sales from the weekend. So let's see whether ChatGPT can help us here. But first, I need to go to, let's say, where is it? It's my dates table in here, which is called datetbl. And from there, I want to get my date column in here. So there it is. So that's the date column. And also maybe go in here and just make the values a little bit bigger. Just hopefully you can see that on your screens. So it should be big enough. But if not, of course, then feel free to get back to me and tell it to me. So also in this data or the view itself, I don't need the day and I also don't need the quarter. I only want to have the year and the month. That's fine. Okay. So here we go. So next I want to see a measure. And for this measure, let's go to the measures table here. And let's take a look at the total sales, for instance, here, total sales. And I can see here, these are the total sales for each month-year combination across my data set. So far, nothing new. Now let's actually go inside our data set here. And in my dates table, I have another column, which is called in this case, day of week. Name and day of week. So if we go to the data view and take a look at the dates table, go on here, we see that the day of week are numbers for me. So which numbers between, in this case, 0 and 6. And there here, I can see the day of week name, which in my case is the German name. But for you, of course, would be the name of in your local language. So what I can tell you here is that it starts from 0 on Monday and it ends at 6 on Sunday. So obviously the weeks or the weekends actually are 5 and 6 in my data set could be different. For you, it really depends a little bit sometimes on the local settings. But for me, the 5 is Saturday and the 6 are Sunday. So I want to exclude actually 5 and 6, right? So to do that, let's actually first see whether that works with a basic data slicer. So let's go on here and say, I want to use a slicer in here. So click somewhere on the blank canvas, click on slicer and then choose here the day of week. In this case, I'm using day of week name and here I can see all the week names again. Apologize. These are German, but hopefully can get the point that Saturday and Sunday, the last two ones here, these are actually the weekends. So if I go in here in the format visual and say, I'd like to actually for the slicer settings, they used to be on the docs, but now probably or Microsoft has now put them here inside the formatting pane. We could specify what kind of style in the selection. We could say, I want to also see the select all here. So if I select everything, I can see the total sales exactly as they are. So far so good. If I now untick a Sunday and also untake Saturday like that, here I would see that only the total sales which have been achieved during the week, okay, excluding the weekends. And I can see a total number here. And what we want now from ChatGPT is actually create the measure which delivers us exactly those results without filtering the data in here. The filter itself, like the day of week name, should be included in the measure we create. So before we do that, of course, you need to sign up for ChatGPT at OpenAI. You can do that for free. So I just want to mention that. And then we can go inside the chat window here in the browser and now we can see we get ChatGPT here and we can use here it can create our prompt here and figure out whether ChatGPT can create the text message that we need. Now to do that, we need to be very specific because what we basically want is we want a measure which we can use directly because sometimes of course ChatGPT might create first a scaffold for the measure and then we need to adjust it on our data set. This is true, but we want to be as precise as possible to get the best kind of measure. And in an optimal way, we can use the measure directly in our data set. To do this, we need to be very specific as I said. So if we go to our power file here, let's just see, we need to make sure, okay, we have actually a total sales measure. So the measure itself we would have is total sales, which we want to adjust, right? Then also we need to take a closer look at the table names. So for instance, I have a dates table, which is called dates TBL. In my case could be different for you. But for me, it's dates TBL. And also I have an orders table. For instance, if I want to refer to this one, I would tell it that the orders tables called orders TBL. And in the dates table, the date column we need is the date here. Or for instance, the day of week name, or actually the day of week, which are considering the numbers, right? From 0 to 6 is called day of week. Okay. So I want to be very specific regarding the the names of the columns, as well as the names of the tables, when I tell ChatGPT what kind of script it should create. Okay. So having said that, let's go back in here. And now let's actually write here our script, or actually our prompt, in order to get the measure, right? So let's say I have a datasets, in this case in Power BI, with facts table called orders TBL. And it's actually capitalized. So orders TBL, I call it exactly this one. And dates table, and then say with name. So the name of the table is dates TBL. Okay. As I said, really specific. Now the date column, in this case column, that the day column is in the dates table. So in the dates TBL is called date. So just in case they need to do some time intelligence function, now, ChatGPT would know about the date column and the dates table. So now the interesting part, the dates TBL has a column in here. And this column is called day of week, and also I need to spell correctly. In here, where Saturday in my case is 5. And Sunday in my case is 6. Okay. So now I have a measure, which I want to change, which is called total sales, right? Total sales. And I want to calculate in this case, measure, so a new measure, say new measure. Measure, okay, that, which returns this case, the total sales. But excluding, and I'll call it weekend days. Okay, like that. So that's my prompts. And that's actually execute this. And then now let's see what ChatGPT is creating here for us. Okay. Might take a little bit of time. Depends. Of course, in this case, I'm using the free version of ChatGPT, right, which I signed up for. So of course, I'm not using the pro version. So it might take a little bit longer for me. Of course, if you use a pro version, you might get faster results. So you can see here now, okay, it's not actually generating text here. And now let's see the formula itself. So let's call it total sales, including weekends, and calculate. Okay. Total sales. Yes, that's my current measure. And I want to modify that. That's also true. And it filters that dates TBL, as you can see here. It's also using the correct names in here. And it says that the dates TBL day of week, which is the column we gave it, should be less than 5. Okay. So this actually looks very promising, as I said, have to say, because it looks really correct. And now let's actually see whether we get the results. So here it tells a little bit more, but actually we are interested in code. So we copy this now. And okay, just see what it does. It tells us AK dates table that we listen 5, of course, when it's a weekdays, it's true. Total sales, good weekend days. Okay. That is the response we get. Now, as I said, I copy the code and now I go back to Power BI. So open Power BI here. And now let me actually create a new measure. So I'll right click on the measures table here, new measure. And now I paste this inside. And this is exactly the code, JetShip, created first, right? And you can see here all the columns and the name of the columns and also the measures. Here are identified correctly because they are exactly the same names. So let me just in this case, click on this one here, press enter just to create the measure. Here we go. And now let's actually take a look at the measure. I first take my table here, then I take the new measure, which JetShip created for us. And let's have a look. And we can see that actually that looks very promising, right? So we can see we got the same result here. We also got the same results as far as I can see here for the sales. And now if we of course now remove the filter to see our original total sales, we should as still see the same result here, of course, 830,020. So let's select everything here. And you can see we get exactly the same result as before. Now the total sales, of course, are now for all the days of the week, but the extruding weekend sales are still the ones excluding Saturday and Sunday. And that's it basically. So as you can see that JetShip can help us actually creating DEX measures and well, building our report in Power BI for us. Of course, as you can see, we need to be very specific if you want to have a very good result from chat. But regarding the column names you have, as well as regarding the data set you have and what you want to actually achieve. Also please keep in mind that the more complex your data model is and also the measure you want to create is of course, the more JetShip you might give you more a scaffold than a really exact result. But still it might be helpful for you. And that's it basically for this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it and thanks a lot for watching. If you have not done so far, please give the rating to the course. It means a lot to me. Thanks, wish you all the best and see you in the next video.